What happens when the man who threw you away laughs at the one person who truly sees your worth? The answer was about to change everything Ryan Walker thought he knew. The ballroom buzzed with laughter, expensive champagne, and the confidence of people who believed they understood exactly how the story ended. Ryan certainly did. Standing beside his glamorous fiancée, Tiffany Brooks, he felt completely in control. After all, he had spent years convincing himself that divorcing Emily Carter had been the smartest decision of his life. She had been too quiet, too emotional, too ordinary, or at least that was the story he repeated whenever anyone asked about his ex-wife. Tonight, Emily had arrived with someone new, a man named Daniel Hayes. Ryan took one look at him and smirked. Daniel did not look like the kind of man who belonged among corporate executives, investors, and social elites. His suit was simple. His watch was unremarkable. He spoke softly and never tried to impress anyone. To Ryan, the man seemed completely forgettable. That made mocking him easy. The jokes started small. A comment about Daniel's suit. A sarcastic question about what he did for a living. A few laughs from the crowd. Tiffany joined in. So did several guests eager to stay close to Ryan's side. Through it all, Daniel never reacted. He simply smiled and stayed focused on Emily. That calmness irritated Ryan more than any argument could have. Why was this man not embarrassed? Why did he look so completely unaffected? Emily noticed it too. She knew something nobody else in that room knew. She knew Daniel was not the person everyone assumed he was. But she said nothing. She had learned long ago that some truths reveal themselves at exactly the right moment. Then the atmosphere changed. A black luxury sedan arrived outside the venue. Conversation slowed. Several executives hurried toward the entrance. The chairman of one of the largest companies in the country had just arrived unexpectedly. People whispered. Cameras turned. The room shifted its attention. Ryan straightened his jacket, hoping to make a strong impression. But the powerful guest did not walk toward Ryan. He did not walk toward Tiffany. He did not even acknowledge the crowd. Instead, he crossed the room with purpose and stopped directly in front of Daniel Hayes. The entire ballroom fell silent. Then, with a warm smile and unmistakable respect, the influential executive extended his hand and said words that instantly drained the color from Ryan's face. In that moment, everyone realized they had been looking at the wrong man all night. And Ryan was about to learn a truth that would make him question every choice he had made since losing Emily. 10 years earlier, Emily Carter stood in the kitchen of a modest suburban home just outside Chicago, staring at a stack of unpaid bills while a pot of coffee cooled beside her. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of morning traffic. Ryan Walker was already gone, having left before sunrise for another meeting. Back then, he was not the confident executive people admired today. He was ambitious, certainly, but his career was still fragile, balanced on opportunities that could disappear overnight. Emily remembered those years better than anyone. She remembered the sacrifices nobody else saw. The canceled vacations. The evenings spent alone while Ryan worked late. The financial risks they took when success was nothing more than a possibility. When Ryan doubted himself, Emily encouraged him. When opportunities fell apart, she helped him rebuild his confidence. When long workdays left him exhausted and frustrated, she listened without complaint. She believed in him long before anyone else did. That belief became the foundation of their marriage. At least for a while. As Ryan's career accelerated, their lives changed. Promotions led to bigger offices. Bigger offices led to larger paychecks. Larger paychecks opened doors into social circles neither of them had imagined years earlier. At first, Emily was proud. She celebrated every achievement, every promotion, every milestone. Watching Ryan succeed felt like watching their shared dream come true. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. The man who once thanked her for standing beside him slowly became someone else. Success brought confidence. Confidence became pride. Pride became entitlement. Ryan began measuring people differently. Conversations increasingly focused on status, influence, and perception. He cared about who attended certain events, which neighborhoods people lived in, what cars they drove, which companies appeared on business cards. Emily noticed the changes long before anyone else. She tried to ignore them. She told herself he was under pressure. She convinced herself things would improve after the next promotion or the next major contract. Instead, the distance between them continued growing. Small comments became regular occurrences. Ryan criticized her clothing choices before corporate events. He suggested she become more outgoing around executives. He occasionally joked that she lacked ambition compared to the wives of his colleagues. The remarks were rarely cruel enough to start an argument, but they left marks all the same. Each one carried the same message. You are no longer enough. Emily never stopped supporting him, yet she increasingly felt invisible inside her own marriage. One evening during a company dinner, a senior executive complimented Ryan on his recent success. Ryan smiled and spent several minutes discussing the hard work required to reach his position. Emily sat beside him listening quietly. Not once did he acknowledge her role in the journey. Not once did he mention the years they spent building a life together while his career took shape. It should have been a small moment. Instead, it stayed with her for months. Because for the first time, she realized Ryan was beginning to rewrite his own story. A version where he succeeded entirely on his own. Over the following years, the emotional distance became impossible to ignore. Ryan traveled constantly. Business dinners replaced family dinners. Weekend conversations turned into brief exchanges about schedules and obligations. Emily often felt like a guest in her own home. Whenever she tried discussing the growing disconnect, Ryan dismissed her concerns. He claimed she worried too much. He said she was focusing on problems that did not exist. Eventually, she stopped bringing them up. Silence became easier than disappointment. Then came the night that changed everything. Ryan arrived home unusually late after a corporate event. He poured himself a drink and sat across from Emily at the kitchen table. His expression was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that appears when a decision has already been made. Emily felt her stomach tighten before he spoke. What followed was not a fight. It was not an emotional confrontation. In some ways, that made it worse. Ryan explained that they had grown apart. He said they wanted different things. He spoke about personal growth, new chapters, and the importance of moving forward. The words sounded carefully prepared, as though he had rehearsed them many times. Emily listened quietly while the life she thought they were building together slipped away one sentence at a time. When he finally stopped speaking, the room felt strangely empty. She looked at the man she had spent years supporting and realized he had already left the marriage long before that conversation began. The divorce was finalized less than a year later. Ryan moved forward quickly. Very quickly. Friends took sides. Social circles shifted. Invitations disappeared. Emily watched people she had known for years gradually drift toward the more successful, more visible version of the story. And through it all, one question followed her everywhere. How could someone she had loved for so long forget her value so completely? At the time, she believed she would never find an answer. She had no way of knowing that years later, the answer would walk into her life when she least expected it, carrying none of the qualities Ryan valued most and all of the qualities he had forgotten mattered. The first year after the divorce felt like walking through a city she no longer recognized. Every street carried memories. Every restaurant reminded Emily of conversations that no longer mattered. Friends she thought would remain in her life became distant. Some openly sided with Ryan. Others simply disappeared. At first, the silence hurt more than the divorce itself. She had spent so many years defining herself as part of a partnership that learning how to exist alone felt unfamiliar. Yet something unexpected happened as the months passed. The constant pressure she had carried for years slowly began to fade. There were no more criticisms about how she dressed. No more reminders that she was not ambitious enough. No more evenings spent waiting for someone who rarely came home before midnight. For the first time in a long time, Emily had room to breathe. She returned to things she once loved. Reading novels on rainy afternoons. Volunteering at local community events. Taking long walks along the Chicago River without feeling guilty for spending time on herself. The healing was slow, but it was real. Meanwhile, Ryan's life seemed to move in the opposite direction. His social media accounts became a highlight reel of success. Luxury hotels, corporate conferences, exclusive events. Not long after the divorce, Tiffany Brooks appeared beside him in photographs. She was attractive, confident, and comfortable in the spotlight. Together, they looked like the kind of couple featured in business magazines and lifestyle blogs. Emily tried not to pay attention. Most days she succeeded. Then one afternoon, nearly 2 years after the divorce, she ran into a former colleague while shopping downtown. After a few minutes of polite conversation, the woman casually mentioned Ryan and Tiffany's upcoming engagement. Emily smiled and wished them well. The colleague looked surprised. "You are taking this better than I expected," she said. Emily laughed softly. "Some things stop hurting when you stop wishing they were different." The answer surprised even her. Because it was true. Ryan had become part of her past. The realization felt less like sadness and more like freedom. Several months later, Emily attended a charity fundraiser organized by a local literacy foundation. She almost declined the invitation. Large social gatherings still made her uncomfortable. At the last minute, she changed her mind. The event was held inside a historic Chicago library filled with warm lighting, live music, and hundreds of guests supporting educational programs. Emily arrived alone and spent most of the evening speaking with volunteers and donors. Near the end of the event, she accidentally dropped a folder containing several documents. Papers scattered across the floor. Before she could react, another person bent down to help gather them. "Looks like these documents are trying to escape," a calm voice said. Emily laughed despite herself. The man handed the papers back to her with a friendly smile. He introduced himself as Daniel Hayes. Their conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. Yet something about him felt different. He did not ask what she did for a living within the first 30 seconds. He did not mention networking opportunities or business connections. He seemed genuinely interested in people rather than status. After the event ended, Emily assumed she would never see him again. 2 weeks later, she attended another Literacy Foundation meeting. Daniel was there. Then he appeared at a fundraising breakfast the following month. Eventually, their conversations grew longer. They discussed books, travel, family, and community projects. Daniel listened more than he spoke. Whenever Emily asked about his work, his answers remained vague. He simply described himself as someone involved in long-term business projects. Unlike Ryan, he never seemed interested in impressing anyone. That alone made him unusual. One afternoon, nearly 6 months after their first meeting, Daniel invited Emily to lunch. The restaurant was small and unpretentious. During the meal, she found herself laughing more than she had in years. Not because Daniel was trying to entertain her, but because she felt comfortable. Around him. Safe. Respected. Seen. The feeling was unfamiliar enough to catch her off guard. As their relationship developed, Emily noticed other details. Daniel treated waiters, receptionists, and strangers with the same respect he showed everyone else. He remembered small things people told him. He asked thoughtful questions. He never turned conversations back toward himself. The qualities Ryan once dismissed as ordinary suddenly felt extraordinary. Months later, Daniel met Emily's parents. Her mother immediately adored him. Her father, who rarely trusted anyone quickly, spent nearly 3 hours talking with him on the back porch. After Daniel left, her father smiled and said something she never forgot. "That man knows exactly who he is." The observation proved surprisingly accurate. Daniel never seemed concerned about proving himself. He never competed for attention. He never corrected people who underestimated him. In fact, there were moments when Emily suspected he intentionally avoided discussing parts of his life. Once, while they were having dinner, a well-dressed businessman approached their table and greeted Daniel with obvious respect. The man referred to him as Sir, before quickly apologizing and leaving. When Emily asked what that was about, Daniel simply smiled and changed the subject. The mystery should have bothered her. Instead, it made her curious. For the first time since her divorce, Emily found herself looking forward rather than backward. She was not searching for someone to replace Ryan. She was building something entirely different. Something healthier. Something real. What she did not know was that elsewhere in Chicago, Ryan had just seen a photograph from a charity event. And for the first time in years, his attention was no longer focused on his own success. It was focused on the man standing beside Emily. Ryan stared at the photograph far longer than he intended. It had been posted on the Literacy Foundation's website alongside a short article celebrating a successful fundraising campaign. At first, he barely noticed Emily. Then he saw the smile on her face. Not the polite smile she used at social gatherings. Not the careful smile she wore during the final years of their marriage. This one was different. Genuine. Relaxed. Happy. Standing beside her was the same man who had appeared in several recent photographs connected to charity events and community programs. Daniel Hayes. Ryan clicked on the image and zoomed in. The man looked ordinary. No luxury watch. No designer clothing. No visible signs of status. Yet for some reason, the sight irritated him. He told himself it was curiosity. In reality, It felt closer to jealousy, though he would never have admitted that out loud. Later that evening, Tiffany noticed him scrolling through the photographs. "Who is that?" she asked casually. Ryan shrugged. "Emily's new boyfriend." Tiffany examined the image for several seconds before laughing softly. "That is the guy?" Ryan nodded. "Apparently." Tiffany smirked. "Well, she certainly has a type. Quiet. Invisible. Safe." Ryan laughed along with her, but the comment did not bring the satisfaction he expected. Something about Daniel continued bothering him. Over the next several weeks, Ryan began hearing the man's name more frequently. Emily mentioned him in a social media post. A mutual acquaintance casually referred to them as a serious couple. Then, during a networking event, Ryan overheard two people discussing a charity board meeting where Daniel had apparently made a substantial donation. That detail caught his attention immediately. The amount was not disclosed, but the tone suggested it had been significant. Ryan found that strange. Daniel never looked like someone who made substantial donations. Then again, appearances could be misleading. Not that Ryan considered that possibility for very long. One Friday evening, Ryan and Tiffany attended an engagement celebration hosted by one of his business associates. The event brought together executives, investors, and social influencers from across the city. As they entered the venue, Ryan spotted a familiar face near the entrance. Emily, standing beside Daniel. Tiffany noticed them at the same moment. "Well, this should be interesting," she said. Emily looked elegant and confident. More confident than Ryan remembered. She greeted several guests warmly and appeared completely comfortable. Daniel remained at her side, speaking quietly with people as they approached. What immediately stood out was how many individuals seemed genuinely pleased to see him. Not impressed, not intimidated, pleased. Ryan found the distinction odd. Throughout the evening, he observed Daniel interacting with guests from various backgrounds. Business owners, volunteers, retired community leaders, young professionals. Everyone seemed to know him. Yet nobody discussed his career. Nobody mentioned his accomplishments. It was as though an entire section of his life remained invisible. Eventually, curiosity got the better of Ryan. During a conversation near the bar, he approached a mutual acquaintance and casually asked about Daniel. The acquaintance smiled. "Good guy." Ryan waited for more. None came. "What does he do?" Ryan asked. The acquaintance shrugged. "Not really my story to tell." The answer only deepened the mystery. Later that night, Ryan finally approached Emily directly. Their conversation began politely enough. They discussed family updates, mutual friends, and recent events. Then Ryan glanced toward Daniel, who was speaking with an elderly couple nearby. "So," Ryan said, "what exactly does your boyfriend do?" Emily smiled. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious." Her smile widened slightly. "Daniel works hard. He cares about people. He makes a difference where he can." Ryan laughed. "That sounds like a campaign slogan, not an answer." Emily simply shrugged. The response frustrated him more than it should have. Daniel joined them a few moments later and greeted Ryan politely. There was no tension in his voice. No insecurity. No attempt to prove himself. The three of them spoke for several minutes before Daniel excused himself to help event organizers with a fundraising activity. As he walked away, Ryan shook his head. "Nice guy," he admitted. "A little difficult to figure out." Emily looked toward Daniel with a softness Ryan had not seen in years. "That is because he is not trying to be figured out." The comment stayed with Ryan long after the conversation ended. In the months that followed, Emily and Daniel's relationship became increasingly serious. They traveled together, volunteered together, built friendships together. Every time Ryan heard another update, he found himself comparing Daniel to the image he had originally created in his mind. The comparison became harder to maintain. Then came the announcement that changed everything. A major charity organization planned to host its annual gala at one of the most prestigious venues in Chicago. The guest list included influential executives, political leaders, philanthropists, and media personalities from across the country. Ryan and Tiffany received invitations immediately. Several weeks later, Emily informed a mutual friend that she and Daniel would be attending as well. Ryan laughed when he heard the news. "That should be entertaining," he said. Tiffany smiled knowingly. "You think he will fit in?" Ryan glanced at the guest list and shook his head. Not for very long. What neither of them realized was that the upcoming gala was not simply another social event. It was the night everything they believed about Daniel Hayes would finally be tested. And before the evening ended, One simple introduction would force Ryan to question whether he had misunderstood the quiet man from the very beginning. The gala occupied the grand ballroom of one of Chicago's most prestigious hotels, a place where polished marble floors, towering crystal chandeliers, and panoramic city views created an atmosphere of effortless luxury. Guests arrived in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. Conversations drifted between philanthropy, business, politics, and influence. Ryan Walker felt completely at home. Events like this were his territory. He understood the unspoken rules. He knew which people mattered and which people were simply fortunate enough to receive invitations. As he entered the ballroom with Tiffany Brooks on his arm, several executives greeted him warmly. Investors shook his hand. Business leaders exchanged compliments. The familiar attention reinforced everything Ryan believed about himself. Across the room, Emily Carter arrived with Daniel Hayes. Unlike many guests, they did not immediately seek out influential circles or cameras. They greeted volunteers, thanked event staff, and spoke with organizers who had spent months preparing the fundraiser. Emily noticed several people smiling warmly when Daniel approached them. Once again, it struck her how naturally he connected with others, not through status or influence, but through genuine respect. Meanwhile, Ryan observed from a distance. "Look at him," Tiffany whispered. "He looks like he wandered into the wrong event." Ryan smirked. Daniel wore a simple dark suit that fit well but lacked the obvious signs of wealth many guests displayed. No flashy accessories. No attempt to attract attention. To Ryan, the contrast felt almost amusing. As the evening progressed, Ryan's confidence grew. Every conversation reinforced his sense of superiority. Every compliment strengthened the narrative he had spent years building around himself. Then he noticed something that irritated him. Emily looked happy. Truly happy. Not impressed by the room. Not intimidated by the crowd. Simply content. The sight bothered him more than he expected. For years, he had quietly assumed she would eventually realize what she lost. Instead, she appeared more at peace than she ever had during their marriage. The realization unsettled him. During the cocktail hour, a group of guests gathered near one of the ballroom's private lounges. Ryan and Tiffany joined them. Moments later, Emily and Daniel happened to approach the same area. The encounter began politely. Greetings were exchanged. Small talk followed. Then Tiffany smiled sweetly and asked Daniel what he did for a living. Emily immediately recognized the tone. It was the same tone Tiffany often used when she believed someone could not compete with her socially. Daniel answered calmly, "I work on long-term projects." Tiffany laughed lightly. "That sounds mysterious." Daniel smiled. "Not really." Ryan joined in. "Come on, Daniel. Everybody here has a title. What is yours?" Several nearby guests turned their attention toward the conversation. Daniel appeared completely relaxed. "I have never cared much about titles." A few people chuckled. Ryan smiled broadly. "That explains why nobody seems to know what you do." More laughter followed. Emily felt the familiar sting of watching people underestimate someone they did not understand. Yet Daniel remained unbothered. He simply took a sip of water and continued listening to the conversation. The reaction only encouraged Ryan. Throughout the next half hour, he found subtle ways to keep the jokes going. Comments about ambition, remarks about career success, light-hearted observations about how difficult it must be to navigate events like this without industry connections. None of the comments were openly cruel, but their purpose was obvious. Tiffany happily contributed. Several guests laughed along. Daniel never pushed back, never became defensive, never tried to prove anything. Emily watched carefully. Most people would have reacted by now. Daniel seemed almost amused. Eventually, the ballroom lights dimmed slightly as organizers prepared for the evening's main presentation. Guests began moving toward their assigned tables. Ryan leaned toward Daniel one final time. "Hopefully tonight gives you a chance to meet some important people." Tiffany smiled. "Networking can change everything." Daniel nodded politely. "That is true." Ryan laughed. "You never know. Maybe one of them can help your career." Emily expected Daniel to finally respond. Instead, he simply smiled and said, "That is very kind of you." The answer somehow made Ryan feel even more victorious. As guests settled into their seats, the charity chairman stepped onto the stage to begin the program. Awards would be presented. Major donors would be recognized. Several national business leaders were scheduled to attend. Cameras positioned throughout the ballroom prepared to broadcast portions of the event online. The atmosphere shifted from casual conversation to formal ceremony. Yet beneath the elegance, an invisible tension lingered. Emily sensed it. Daniel seemed aware of it as well. Across the room, Ryan relaxed comfortably in his chair, completely convinced he understood exactly who Daniel Hayes was. That confidence lasted until the ballroom entrance doors opened and a wave of whispers spread through the crowd. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. Even the chairman paused briefly on stage. Someone important had just arrived. Very important. Ryan immediately straightened his jacket, hoping for an opportunity to make a strong impression. What happened next would become the most talked-about moment of the entire evening. The man who entered the ballroom was recognized immediately by nearly everyone in attendance. Jonathan Mercer was not a celebrity in the traditional sense, but within the worlds of business, philanthropy, and finance, his name carried extraordinary weight. He led one of the largest charitable foundations in the country and served on the boards of multiple international organizations. Journalists often described him as one of the most influential private citizens in America. The moment he stepped inside, conversation stopped. Guests turned toward the entrance. Organizers hurried forward to greet him. Ryan felt a rush of excitement. This was exactly the type of person he hoped to meet. An introduction could open doors that normally remained closed. Beside him, Tiffany smiled confidently and adjusted her posture. Across the room, Emily simply watched. Daniel remained seated, calm as ever. What happened next made no sense. Jonathan Mercer acknowledged the welcoming committee with a polite nod, exchanged a few brief words with the charity chairman, then looked past everyone else in the room. His eyes settled on Daniel. Without hesitation, he changed direction and walked straight toward their table. At first, Ryan assumed it was coincidence. Then Jonathan's face broke into a genuine smile. A smile unlike the carefully managed expressions he offered during public appearances. Guests watched curiously as one of the most influential men in the country crossed the ballroom. When he reached Daniel, he extended his hand immediately. "Daniel," he said warmly, "I was hoping you would be here tonight." The room fell noticeably quieter. Daniel stood and shook his hand. "Good to see you, Jonathan." The familiarity of the exchange startled everyone nearby. Jonathan then turned toward Emily. "You must be Emily. I have heard wonderful things about you." Emily thanked him politely, trying not to reveal her own surprise. Jonathan spoke with them for several moments before the charity chairman approached, clearly eager to bring him toward the stage. Before leaving, Jonathan placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Do not disappear before we talk," he said. "There are several people here who would like to see you." Then he walked away. Ryan stared after him. His confidence had taken its first real hit of the evening. Tiffany leaned closer. "How does he know Jonathan Mercer?" she whispered. Ryan forced a laugh. Maybe they met through charity work. The explanation sounded weak even to him. A few nearby guests had clearly noticed the interaction as well. Suddenly, people who had ignored Daniel earlier seemed interested in speaking with him. The shift was subtle but undeniable. Throughout dinner, additional surprises followed. A respected university president stopped by their table to greet Daniel. Later, the founder of a nationally recognized nonprofit organization approached to thank him for supporting a recent project. Each interaction seemed genuine, personal, respectful. Nobody spoke to Daniel like a stranger. More importantly, nobody spoke to him like someone seeking a favor. They spoke to him like an equal. Ryan struggled to make sense of it. The man he had spent the evening mocking appeared to be connected to people far beyond Ryan's professional network. Yet Daniel still showed no interest in discussing himself. During the dinner program, major donors were recognized for their contributions to various educational and community initiatives. As names appeared on screens throughout the ballroom, applause followed each announcement. Several contributions reached six figures. A few exceeded $1 million. The audience responded enthusiastically. Then the chairman paused and smiled. "Tonight," he said, "we would also like to recognize an individual who consistently requests anonymity and who has quietly transformed countless lives through his generosity." A photograph of several scholarship recipients appeared on the screen. Without his support, many of these students would never have had the opportunity to pursue higher education. Ryan listened politely. So did everyone else. Then the chairman continued. "Although he rarely accepts public recognition, we convinced him to allow us this small exception. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Daniel Hayes." For a moment, The ballroom seemed frozen. Ryan genuinely thought he had misheard the name. Around him, heads turned toward Daniel's table. Applause began slowly, then grew louder. Much louder. Emily looked at Daniel in surprise. Even she had not known the full extent of his involvement. Daniel appeared mildly uncomfortable with the attention, but stood politely as the audience applauded. The chairman continued speaking. Over the past decade, Daniel had funded scholarship programs, literacy initiatives, medical research grants, and community development projects across multiple states. Millions of dollars had been invested through foundations and charitable partnerships. Yet his name rarely appeared in headlines because he consistently declined publicity. Ryan felt the room shifting beneath him. Every assumption he had made about Daniel suddenly felt unreliable. Tiffany stared at the stage in disbelief. "Millions?" she whispered. The chairman smiled warmly. "Some people build reputations. Others build opportunities. Daniel Hayes has spent years doing the second." More applause followed. Yet despite everything that had been revealed, the most important truth remained hidden. Ryan did not realize that the recognition ceremony was only the beginning. Because while the audience now understood that Daniel was generous and influential, they still had no idea who he really was. And within the next hour, a single introduction would expose a reality so unexpected that even Ryan's most confident assumptions would collapse completely. After the recognition ceremony ended, the atmosphere inside the ballroom felt completely different. People who had barely noticed Daniel earlier now wanted to speak with him. Invitations appeared. Conversations shifted. Questions multiplied. Yet Daniel responded to the attention the same way he responded to everything else that evening. Calmly, politely, without the slightest interest in impressing anyone. Emily watched the transformation with quiet amusement. For months, she had sensed there was more to Daniel's story than he revealed. Now she was beginning to understand just how much remained hidden. Across the room, Ryan sat unusually quiet. The confidence that had fueled his jokes earlier in the evening was gone. In its place was uncertainty. Not because Daniel had been recognized. Ryan knew wealthy philanthropists and successful executives. Recognition alone did not explain the reactions he was witnessing. The deeper issue was respect. Powerful people seemed to respect Daniel in a way Ryan rarely experienced himself. That difference bothered him. As dessert was served, Jonathan Mercer returned to Daniel's table. This time he was joined by several prominent guests. A former cabinet secretary, the chairman of a global technology company, the president of a major university. Each greeted Daniel warmly. Not as a donor, not as a sponsor, as a peer. Ryan watched the interaction from across the room. Tiffany followed his gaze. "Who exactly is this guy?" she asked. Ryan did not answer because he no longer trusted his own assumptions. A short while later, the evening's final presentation began. The charity chairman returned to the stage to announce a new national initiative focused on educational access and community development. The project represented one of the largest efforts in the organization's history. Several large corporations had contributed funding. Multiple foundations had committed resources. The audience listened attentively as the chairman described the scale of the initiative. Then he smiled. "There is one more person we would like to acknowledge tonight." A large screen illuminated behind him. Photographs appeared showing schools, scholarship recipients, community centers, and development projects across the country. The chairman continued. "Many people know this individual through philanthropy. Others know him through business. What most people do not realize is that nearly every project you see on this screen exists because of one decision he made more than 15 years ago." The room became silent. The next image appeared. It was a corporate headquarters unlike anything Ryan had ever seen. The logo displayed on the building belonged to one of the largest privately held investment and development companies in North America. Ryan recognized it instantly. Almost everyone did. The company controlled billions of dollars in assets and operated across multiple industries. The chairman smiled. "Tonight, we would also like to recognize the founder and chairman of Hayes Global Development." Ryan felt his heartbeat accelerate. His eyes moved immediately toward Daniel. Around the ballroom, hundreds of guests turned in the same direction. The chairman continued. "A man whose business achievements have impacted communities across the country and whose leadership continues to create opportunities for thousands of families. Ladies and gentlemen, Daniel Hayes." The reaction was immediate. Applause erupted throughout the ballroom. Some guests even stood. Ryan remained frozen in his seat. For several seconds, he genuinely struggled to process what he had just heard. Hayes Global Development. The name carried enormous weight. His own company had attempted to secure a partnership with them more than once. Senior executives spent years trying to gain access to decision-makers within the organization. Ryan had attended conferences where speakers referenced Daniel's business strategies as case studies. Yet somehow he had never connected the name. He had never imagined the quiet man beside Emily was that Daniel Hayes. Tiffany's expression mirrored his shock. "That cannot be real," she whispered. But it was. Daniel stood and acknowledged the applause with a modest nod. No dramatic speech. No display of superiority. No attempt to enjoy Ryan's discomfort. The chairman invited him to the stage. As Daniel approached the podium, the audience continued applauding. Emily watched proudly. Not because of Daniel's success. Because of the kind of man he remained despite that success. Daniel accepted the award and looked across the room. "I appreciate the recognition," he said. "But the truth is that none of the projects we celebrate tonight were built by one person. They were built by teachers, volunteers, families, and community leaders who cared enough to keep showing up." The simplicity of the statement somehow made it more powerful. He spent only a few minutes speaking before returning to his seat. Yet those few minutes revealed more about his character than any financial report ever could. Ryan sat in silence. The realization was impossible to avoid now. Earlier that evening, he had mocked a man whose accomplishments far exceeded his own. Worse, he had done it while standing beside the woman who had once believed in him before anyone else did. For the first time in years, Ryan found himself questioning not Daniel's value, but his own choices. And as he looked toward Emily and saw the peace in her eyes, another painful truth began settling into place. Daniel's success was impressive, but that was not what hurt the most. What hurt was realizing that Emily had found someone who appreciated everything Ryan had spent years taking for granted. The applause eventually faded, but the impact of the evening lingered long after the final presentation ended. Guests continued discussing Daniel's accomplishments as they moved through the ballroom. Journalists updated stories. Executives exchanged business cards. Philanthropists spoke about future partnerships. Yet for Ryan Walker, the noise around him felt distant. His attention remained fixed on a much simpler image. Emily laughing beside Daniel. Not because of his wealth. Not because of his influence. Because she genuinely enjoyed being with him. For years, Ryan had convinced himself that success was measured by titles, income, and recognition. Tonight, he was seeing another definition. One he had ignored for far too long. As the event began winding down, guests slowly made their way toward the exits. Tiffany remained unusually quiet. Earlier in the evening, she had eagerly participated in every joke and sarcastic comment. Now she avoided discussing Daniel entirely. Ryan understood why. Every assumption they had made had been wrong. Not just about Daniel's success, but about his character. The man had endured their mockery without anger, arrogance, or the need to prove himself. That realization was difficult to ignore. Near the entrance, Ryan noticed Emily and Daniel preparing to leave. For several moments, he considered walking away. It would have been easier. Instead, he found himself moving toward them. Emily saw him approaching and offered a polite smile. Daniel greeted him with the same calm courtesy he had shown all evening. No resentment. No triumph. No sign that he wanted Ryan to feel embarrassed. Somehow that made the moment even harder. Ryan looked at Daniel first. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. Daniel studied him for a second before nodding. "Thank you." There was no lecture. No attempt to make Ryan uncomfortable. Just simple acceptance. Ryan then turned toward Emily. For a moment, neither spoke. Years of memories stood silently between them. The small house where they started their lives together. The sacrifices she made. The support she gave him when success was uncertain. The countless moments he had overlooked because he assumed she would always be there. Finally, Ryan smiled sadly. "You look happy." Emily glanced toward Daniel before answering. "I am." The honesty in her voice carried no bitterness. No desire to hurt him. It was simply the truth. And somehow that truth hurt more than anger ever could. Ryan nodded slowly. "I am glad." He wanted to say more. He wanted to explain himself. To defend old decisions. To justify the mistakes he had made. But for the first time in years, excuses felt unnecessary. Deep down, he already knew what happened. He did not lose Emily because someone else came along. He lost her because he stopped appreciating her long before she left. Daniel extended his hand. Ryan shook it. The gesture lasted only a few seconds, yet it felt strangely important. Not because Daniel had won anything. Because the moment marked the end of a story Ryan had been telling himself for years. A story where success automatically meant wisdom. A story where status automatically meant value. A story where appearances revealed everything worth knowing. That story was over. Emily and Daniel eventually walked toward the hotel entrance together. Ryan watched them disappear into the evening crowd. He expected regret. What he felt instead was clarity. For the first time, he could see his past without rewriting it. He could finally admit that Emily had always deserved more than what he gave her. Outside, the city lights reflected across the river as traffic moved through downtown Chicago. Emily and Daniel stepped into the cool night air. Neither spoke immediately. After a few moments, Daniel smiled. That was quite an evening. Emily laughed softly. You could say that. He opened the car door for her before walking around to the driver's side. As they pulled away from the hotel, Emily looked back once at the glowing building growing smaller in the distance. Years earlier, she would have viewed the evening as a victory. Proof that she had moved on. Proof that Ryan had been wrong. But now, sitting beside someone who respected her exactly as she was, she saw it differently. The night was not about proving anything. It was about closure. The need for validation had disappeared the moment she learned to value herself. Months later, life continued moving forward. Daniel remained deeply involved in his charitable and business work. Emily expanded her role within several community organizations she cared about. Together, they built a relationship grounded in trust, kindness, and mutual respect. Not perfection, not fantasy, just the steady comfort of knowing they could rely on each other. Meanwhile, Ryan occasionally saw updates about their lives through mutual friends. Each time, he felt a familiar ache. Not because he wanted Emily back, because he finally understood what he had thrown away. Sometimes the greatest losses are not the opportunities we never had. They are the people we failed to appreciate when they were standing right beside us. Years earlier, Ryan believed he understood what made a person valuable. Wealth, influence, recognition. The gala taught him otherwise. True worth often hides beneath the surface. It appears in loyalty, humility, generosity, and character. The qualities Daniel possessed without advertising them. The qualities Emily carried all along. And in the end, the truth that changed everything was not that Daniel Hayes was far more successful than anyone imagined. The truth was that Emily Carter had always been extraordinary. The difference was that someone finally saw it, appreciated it, and never took it for granted.